Welcome to Nale Yoga, the podcast with Yoga Nidra journeys for deep rest and more. I'm Ruthie Eisenberg, and today I'm super excited to be talking with a very special guest, Ayla Nova. Just a little bit of background. When I was doing my Yoga Nidra teacher training, I started getting really into the practice, and I tried a lot of different Yoga Nidras. I tried a lot of different facilitators and podcasts and instructors. And then I found Ayla Nova's podcast, Yoga Nidra and Beyond. And you know how sometimes when you're not really exactly sure what you're looking for, then you find it and you're like, yes, that's what I was looking for. I just didn't know it. So that's how it felt when I was listening to Ayla Nova's Yoga Nidras. They are just beautiful journeys. So I ended up reaching out and did some mentorship under Ayla. And she's just been a really positive influence and an inspiration for me in developing this podcast. So I'm super excited for you guys to hear her wisdom and hear what she has to say. So without further ado, maybe we can start, Ayla, with you just sharing a little bit about your story and how you got into Yoga Nidra.
Thank you for having me here, Ruthie. I am excited to be on your podcast. And yeah, it's full circle coming around. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you for everything you shared there. And my background is I have been teaching Yoga Nidra since after the pandemic. I used it as a part of my healing journey while I was going through cancer. And so I found the benefit of it. And I'd been studying yoga for years before that. But when I lost mobility, Yoga Nidra became this practice that I could access while I was losing my mobility and not able to do my yoga asana practice anymore. And because the cancer that I had was known to go to the brain, I felt like the most important thing for me to heal through that journey was my thoughts. So using a Sankalpa and diving more deeply into this practice, taking the teacher training while I was going through the final process of my healing journey was really transformative. And I didn't get started on sharing it on YouTube or on podcasts until a couple years after I'd recovered, because it is a bit of a process, that recovery. So I first used it to create scripts to heal my thoughts, my feelings, the sensations that were coming up, meeting myself where I was, which was drastically different than what I could recollect in my past. So that's kind of in a very short nutshell how I came to share this practice.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And it's amazing, first of all, how yoga has something to offer for any situation and any person under any condition. And you're such a great example of how you're able to start with healing your thoughts as a way to bridge that mind-body connection and heal your body via the thoughts, which is just such an amazing transformation and testament to really the power of the mind in healing.
Yeah, I find that Yoga Nidra, being that you can access it at any state of mobility, one of the most beautiful parts about it, because as a yogi, it's more than just yoga asana. It's also philosophy. And it's like you're going through the koshas, these different layers of being while you're practicing. Mm-hmm. And when you're going through a crisis, whether it be mental or physical, this is a way to, rather than dissociate from the experience or try to escape what you're going through, you lean into it. And that's what I've found Yoga Nidra is the most healing modality I've worked with so far, because it really requires the opposite of doing. It's non-doing. It's really being present with yourself and recognizing and allowing yourself to feel what comes up and notice where it is in the body, notice where you feel it in your energy, and then transmuting that into that recognition that you are more than just the pain or the suffering or the narrative or the story that plays in your mind when you're not practicing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. How often do we get to just be, without getting trapped in doing mode? I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, you mentioned Sankalpa before, you mentioned the koshas. So some of our audience might not know what those things are. And so I would love if we could maybe back up a little bit and talk about what is a Sankalpa. And maybe you could share a little bit about your Sankalpa process and what that is.
Absolutely. The Sankalpa, this is a Sanskrit word that in yoga, it is a resolve. Mm-hmm. And you come into this practice, you come into most meditation practices trying to seek stillness, openness, and clearing the mind. But what lies underneath that current is this idea that we all have that we need to solve something. But what a Sankalpa does is it's an I am or I declaration to self that resonates deeply within you, that acts as a reminder, because from the moment that we're born until where we are today, mm-hmm. where we began was this pure, beautiful essence, this spiritual being that comes into the human body. And through that experience, we get influenced and impacted by what comes up. There's these influential moments that happen as early as childbirth that create a subconscious program. And what we do through yoga, meditation, but more importantly in this conversation, the Sankalpa, is we're using this resolve to remind us that that story we tell ourselves isn't truth. The truth is that we were always whole. We were always enough. We were always worthy or abundant, whatever it might be. And there's different seasons for different Sankalpas. And the longer that I practiced Yoga Nidra, I had an evolution of Sankalpas. But ultimately what ended up happening was I landed on one that felt really resonant. And I believe that a lot of practitioners will come to that eventually for themselves as well. And it's not supposed to be a goal. It's not supposed to be a desire in the sense of, I want that. It's a heartfelt desire as in, I need this medicine to remind myself of my wholeness, of my innateness, my divine nature. The Sankalpa is more potent than an affirmation. It's something that what we did before we hopped on this podcast together is we breathed together with a heart-mind coherency. So wanting to touch into your Sankalpa, you want to connect your heart to the mind and allow both of those brains to speak to you. And for some of us, we even might resonate with our gut. Because we've got the mind as our, the big brain, and our little brains are the heart and the guts. And the heart and the gut, they actually send more messages to the brain than the brain sends to them. So when we can connect all of those different parts of ourselves into a meditation or open awareness, then it can help us access what our true heartfelt, visceral gut feeling with the mind to create this I am declaration to self that resonates for your Yoga Nidra practice. So we use this at the beginning of a Yoga Nidra, and we use this at the end. And there's a bit of a science to it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Maybe you could just share a little bit, keep talking.
So what happens when we go into sleep? So there's 4 stages of sleep. We've got the first 3, which are non-REM, and the final one, which is REM sleep. So rapid eye movement. This is where you're getting into that deep rest where the eyes behind the lids are moving back and forth. This is actually a really fascinating phenomenon that happens while we're sleeping, which helps to regulate the nervous system. And what makes Yoga Nidra very unique is that as you go through the process of resting the body and connecting with your energy, you go into this oscillation between the alpha and theta brainwave states, which is where you go into in about the second to third, fourth stages of sleep. So when you're using a Sankalpa, in that oscillation that moves from your wakeful beta state, like where we're at right now to record this, to that part where you're kind of in a dreamscape within the mind where you might be able to like imagine where you are, create some abstract experiences, maybe noticing energy centers or the chakras, things like that. And when you go into that state, you're tapping into the subconscious. And the subconscious is not so malleable in the beta state, but it is more malleable in the alpha theta oscillation. So the program that we know in our waking state, let's say, for example, worthiness, not feeling worthy of love or abundance or something like that. In our waking state, we can try to talk ourselves out of that, but on a deeper level, it feels very true. So when we are about to fall asleep, we're going into that oscillation between the alpha, theta, dropping in a Sankalpa, this I am declaration, and it touches into that subconscious space. So that creates the new electrochemical reaction within the brain because we're in a parasympathetic nervous system where we're calming, resting, and digesting. And it creates a new neural pathway. And so then when we are about to come out of Yoga Nidra, it's like waking up in the morning and we say it again and it instills that pathway. So then when you go back into the beta state, now you start to view life through the lenses of, oh, I am worthy. You can start to see it. It becomes more tangible in your waking life. So if you're getting into Yoga Nidra now and you're just starting into it and you want to work with the Sankalpa, if you wanted to take it outside of the practice, you could say it to yourself right upon waking or right upon going to bed, or use a Yoga Nidra before bed if that's something that resonates with you. And that would even help enhance it more in a way.
Thank you for explaining all that. I really like what you're saying about the Sankalpa. It really needs to be a brain and body integration. I just learned recently that the heart has about 40 billion serotonin neurotransmitters. And the gut also has tons and tons of, I don't remember the exact number, but also like tons and tons of serotonin neurotransmitters. So the brains, they really do work together and they really do share the same neurochemical pathways. And so I like how you're talking about the brainwave states and they're in connection with the Sankalpa that you plant during Yoga Nidra. When we plant it in the beginning, it's still in that rational mind. Let's say if somebody's core belief is, I am not worthy, right? So we could say it, I am worthy. We could say it a million times in our regular beta state, but it continues to stay with the rational brain. And it might be very hard to really, truly believe it. So I like what you're saying, how with Yoga Nidra, yes, there is a science to it. When we get to those deeper states of consciousness and as we go through the layers, the sheaths of consciousness, the 5 koshas, and we go through the brainwave, the alpha and theta oscillations, and we also get to delta, then this is where the Sankalpa can really be truly believed, absorbed into the body, not just the cognitive brain, and truly integrated. So it's very powerful. We do create our reality with our mind. In Judaism, there's a concept of tafkid, which is your life's kind of like the reason you're put on this earth in this lifetime. So when we talk about Sankalpa, for me, it also brings up this idea of a tafkid. Like, why are we here? What is our mission? What is our purpose? And what is the promise that our soul has made in the beginning to be here and to do while we're here? And so when the Sankalpa really resonates, not just with the brain, but also with the body, that's when we know that this is the right path towards my mission. This is in alignment with my tafkid. And we can only really get to that from this deeper state of consciousness. So thank you for breaking down the art and the science of a Sankalpa, because it is also an art. It's not only a science. It's an exploration. It's a process. It's kind of like a conversation with the self and with the soul.
Absolutely. And I love what you're sharing too. It's like we think about life purpose and automatically there's a part of our mind that thinks about a job that we might have or what kind of title we would have, being a mother or father or a doctor or, a shoemaker, whatever that might be. But there's this deeper essence of purpose that comes up. And I think that when we are able to recognize that those titles really aren't the purpose, those aren't the dharma or what you shared, it's recognizing there's this quality within us that maybe our life's purpose is remembering something that we've forgotten and we continue to forget throughout this lifetime. And so working with a Sankalpa is a way to tap into that life purpose. And it's not like to be a negative thing in Yoga Nidra. This is considered a non-dualistic practice. So there's no like negative or positive, good or bad. We're constantly going through, like you mentioned, these layers of our being, these layers of consciousness. And one that I find really unique is Manamaya Kosha, because it allows you to tap into emotional states, but also beliefs. So you get to go into those polarities of hot or cold or joy or sadness, and oscillate, again, this word coming up a lot. It's again like rapid eye movement, the eyes going back and forth, oscillating between polarities so that you can find the middle ground. There's something very intrinsic about being able to recognize these opposing forces. And that's why I believe there's this conversation in a lot of spiritual texts about finding the middle path, finding the middle ground. And that's what we're doing. We're allowing ourselves to recognize, okay, things can feel high, things can feel low, but there's also that little sweet spot, that idea of balance that comes between it all. And, in yoga asana, that's what we're doing. We're trying to balance our physical body, finding balance between the left and the right and doing these twists and trying to balance muscular features. But in Yoga Nidra, we're creating balance within the mind and the body. So it's such a fascinating practice.
Yeah, this idea of like this energetic balance of the body and the mind and the different parts of the mind and the different parts of the body. We literally, during the body scan, we have experienced just the right side, bring awareness to just the left side. So this is one of my favorite components of Yoga Nidra, is this integration of polarities, because it really teaches us that we are the makers, we are the architects of our own experience. On the outside, you're just laying down there in the same room, not moving the same way as when you started. But on the inside, you could be feeling very hot. You could be feeling very cold. And your mind and body are together, kind of co-creating your internal experience, which is cool, because then when you're going about your day-to-day life, outside of when you're extending your Yoga Nidra practice into day-to-day life, you can take the triggers that come at you and decide, what do I want to do with this? How do I want to respond to this? Not reflexively react, but to respond to this. I have kind of a cool example. I was on a camping trip a while ago, and it was so cold at night. So I just started doing Yoga Nidra, and without the audio, just myself. And I felt like my feet, they were so cold. My toes felt like icicles, but I felt like they were warming up just from my brain sending those signals to experience and generate a feeling of warmth in the body. So Yeah.
I feel like I can relate to that too.
You relate to that?
So I like snowboarding. I'm from Canada. So in the winter, we have to make the most of it because it's so cold. Everybody knows Canada's cold. Yeah. And in the winter, more so than any time of year. And I'm one of those weird people that loves it. I love being out in nature in the winter months. It's so quiet. It's so still. You can hear a crunch of a stick from so far away because the snow, it mutes a lot of the sound. But why I bring that up is because when I go snowboarding, you've got all the elements coming at you. And that's the thing about Yoga Nidra. You don't have to just reserve those experiences to the 15 minutes to an hour that you're lying in Shavasana. You can take the essence of the practice and you can apply it tangibly to life. So when I'm on the chair going up to the top of the mountain, I just close my eyes and I imagine the warmth of beach breeze and the way that it works with the mind cognitively, because the mind is so powerful. That's where you are. You're not in the blistering cold and you can do that oscillation. Okay, I'm experiencing the warm breeze of a beach and now I'm going to this cold reality that's present and then going back and forth. And it's just really, it becomes a metaphor for life in the sense that that's always happening. You know, there's always going to be those polarities. And the truth is that we're looking for this middle ground, this peaceful path for ourselves. And it can be challenging because we fixate on what brings us joy and we fixate on that. But the truth is how could we know joy if we didn't know sadness? And this is an opportunity in these practices to experience that polarity. And then it brings gratitude to those moments that you maybe not would have been grateful for. It's like in the moment of sadness or deep pain or suffering, because of this practice, I now have this moment in the depths of that where I go, okay, this is showing me a deep experience. And because I know that this exists, I know the opposite exists too. And it doesn't take me away necessarily from the experience, but it gives a sense of gratitude for, okay, I feel this, but I know in my heart, I'm grateful that on the other side of this is another reality that's also true.
I love that how experiencing one polarity, you know that there is the other side, the equal and opposite reaction on the continuum. And there's no bad emotions. Like being sad is not a bad thing. Being happy is not a good thing. They're just both, these are the feelings that you have. And how do you rest in those feelings? How do you experience and be curious within those feelings, how your mind and body and soul interact? Talking about the middle path and the balance reminds me of this quote from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. He was this Hasidic rabbi who was just a very spiritual, mystical person. So he has this quote that life is a very narrow bridge and we're on this narrow bridge all the time. And the main thing is to not be afraid. And I just love that line. The main thing is to not be afraid because we are trying to balance these dualities. And yes, we are on this bridge. You know, some bridges are more narrow. Some bridges are maybe a little wider, not so narrow. But in either case, we're always oscillating between dualities. And if we're afraid, if we're anxious, then it takes us out of the present moment. The only way that we can stay balanced on a narrow bridge is we have to be present. We have to be alert. We have to be aware, calm, and focused. So if we're in anxiety mode, worrying about the future or ruminating about the past, then that's what kind of kicks us off the bridge. The cool thing is we can always get back on. But yeah, to not be afraid and to connect it back with Yoga Nidra, this is one of the main benefits of Yoga Nidra is that it just helps with nervous system regulation so much. It helps with self-acceptance so much and just living with reality as it is without trying to fight against it or change it. Really, it's about just going with the flow. And that is so healing and so calming for the nervous system. Because if we stay curious and we just go with the flow, what is there to be afraid of? We can handle anything.
And I would even extend on that a little bit more as not even going with the flow, but being the flow.
Being the flow.
Well, being that, because when you recognize that it's just a part of the life experience, then it's not like you're ever going against the current. I think there's another philosopher that talks about this. I can't think of his name. He's like a karate guy. I can't think of his name. Bruce Lee. He talks about being the flow, and I just love that. But yeah, what happens when we get into fear is it's a cognitive exercise, fear. It's like you feel it in the body, and then all of a sudden it creates the story, right? So when we go through the practice of Yoga Nidra, we're adding in that resolve at the beginning. And then we're going through those layers of the koshas. And the koshas are these layers of consciousness. They're layers of being, but what they are in Sanskrit is they always end with Maya kosha. So Maya in Sanskrit is a veil, a sheath. And what this also comes up as is an illusion. So the illusion is that we are just our body, or we are just our energy, or we are just our emotional or mental states. There's this justness to it where it's like, okay, I am only this. And in moments of life, there are times where we think, oh, this is it, your state of anxiousness. So you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in this state forever. Or we have an injury and we think, man, this is my entire body. I don't have value now, or I'm not enough because of this. But you think about a tree, it breaks a branch and it's still a tree. And we are a part of nature. So when we are practicing Yoga Nidra, it's this reminder that we can be safe in our bodies, even if our bodies aren't doing what science is telling us is considered to be normal. They used Yoga Nidra in studies of PTSD. They've used it for studies for people who have trouble sleeping. And they've also used it for people that have had war experiences, losing a limb or a certain part of the body. And what happens for those people are they get these phantom pains. So you can still feel the pain of a part of the body that no longer exists or is not present, that we can't see. So when we go through the first layer, and this is in all Yoga Nidras, so you'll never do a Yoga Nidra that doesn't go through the body at first. And for some of the more advanced practices, we go into the further koshas, like the breath, the energy, the prana, and then we go into some other things. I'll talk about them later. But first off, the body, what we're doing is we're going through a scan. And even if perhaps we don't have that part of our body anymore, what they learned in that study was people who didn't have that limb, who were experiencing those phantom pains, were able to mentally relax that part of their body, even though it was no longer present. And it helped bring down the stress. It helped bring down the anxiety. And it's also in parallel to that helped people with sleep, because what we were talking about before, those stages of sleep, in the first stage of sleep, what your body is doing is it's turning off the processor to the movement, to being able to move the body. So when we're doing that, that helps to shut down so we can close our eyes and really relax into sleep. And Yoga Nidra does that right at the beginning, where we scan our body, get in touch with our body. And that's why it brings a strengthening of self-awareness. And it also brings us back to our body if maybe we're someone that dissociates with it or has a narrative around different parts of the body. Now, when you're practicing Yoga Nidra, you're asked to use the guide's voice as your own voice. And this is so that when you get yourself hung up on a particular body part and start creating a story, like let's say you get to the right hip, and now all you can think about is, oh man, I injured that hip a couple of years ago. And then the guide's still going and you're still sitting on your hip thinking about it, adding to the story, adding to the suffering, until eventually you build that self-awareness where you go, oh, I just caught myself talking to myself about this injury or this sensation. And now I can hear that the guide is talking about the left shoulder. And so now you can move that awareness, dive back into the practice and continue to move on from that. So what it's teaching us is that level of self-awareness and also a bit of compassion in that you can pick up where it is beginning again. So having, like you mentioned earlier, that curiosity or beginner's mind to not shame or blame ourselves for not following the path and just allowing ourselves to not fall off the bridge, that narrow bridge. Just allow yourself to come back to that bridge and know that anything that steers you away from it is just another universal or divine sign to come back to it. So
yeah, I like that. And also you're talking about kind of moving along, not getting too stuck on one thing. Yes, we can get stuck on the injured hip, but the practice keeps moving, life keeps moving, and we can always reorient ourselves back to the present moment, wherever it's at. So if it's on the left shoulder now, okay, that's where we go. So it teaches us to not get too stuck or too attached to any one story or any one thing. I was going to ask you about trauma-informed Yoga Nidra because I've had some people who've been practicing Yoga Nidra ask me about, there's some images, for example, that they find very disturbing or worried about doing a Yoga Nidra because there could be a triggering image in the visualization. And so these people are, seeking maybe more trauma-informed Yoga Nidra. But, I'm assuming most people who listen to a Yoga Nidra on a podcast might not know kind of the method and the architecture of a Yoga Nidra and what to expect. They might be expecting a very relaxing meditative journey. And then somewhere in the visualization, they might get hit with like a death-oriented kind of image, something more graphic. So I wanted to ask you about trauma-informed Yoga Nidra and how to take that into consideration in terms of balancing out being sensitive to people's psyches and windows of tolerance, and at the same time also pushing them a little bit and challenging and trusting that, yes, we put some of these images into Yoga Nidra visualization on purpose, and there is an intention to it. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, trauma-informed work is such a beautiful thing. I'm grateful that it's on the rise, that people are becoming more conscious of, the words that they use and the way that they guide things. Yoga Nidra, in its essence, is a trauma-informed practice because of the fact it brings you to a state where you can become the observer and realize that, my friend who just took the Peace and Rest program that I offered, she put it into words that I just thought were so beautiful, in that she expressed that through her experience, which was a really challenging time for her, Yoga Nidra allowed her to step back and begin to see the pendulum going back and forth rather than thinking that's all that it is. We'll never be able to, and we never would want to force people to do anything. We're all sovereign beings. If someone has a fear about doing Yoga Nidra, they've probably got their own reasons for it. But also doing something new is just naturally intimidating because it's unknown, right? Yeah. And when you read the comments or find out reviews from people who maybe have had adverse experiences, that can be challenging too. But for any Yoga Nidra guides or for people that are entering into the practice of Yoga Nidra, I would say that, at least on my channel, I'm sure on yours too, if I use anything that's a little bit more provocative in associated symbols, I would label it as advanced because there are some things that come up that as guides, we know could possibly evoke those emotions or feelings or memories. Now, it's not, again, coming back to this non-dualistic nature of the practice, it's not good or bad to have that experience come up. It's a teacher, it's a lesson, it's an experience that arises. So when I'm offering these practices, the reason that it is more trauma-informed is the experience, the education, but also recognizing a level of compassion. A lot of us that are working in trauma-informed work have either been influenced by a vast array of trauma or have worked with a very vulnerable population. So we know from that experience and have that compassion to be able to hold space for that. So I think it's important to look into who's leading these things. You want to have a bit of a background of whether or not they have had some training in this or if they've had experiences that you can relate to. And I feel like I've been very fortunate in that a lot of people just have organically, naturally, like yourself, even you mentioned coming to my podcast and recognizing, okay, this isn't just yogi saying nice words. Like I come from the space of, I grew up and I had spiritual trauma. While I was growing up, I had physical, mental, emotional traumas that influenced how I teach because I know that inner working myself, the sensitivities of certain body parts, of certain associative symbols that can evoke something. In the historic or traditional practice, they would use religious symbols. And for some people, that would be so euphoric and beautiful, while others, it was the opposite. And so there was a lot of controversy about this. And what I bring it back to is when you're creating a Yoga Nidra or when you're choosing a Yoga Nidra, again, discovering someone's voice that resonates with you, whether that's purely on the sound or whether that is with their origin stories of how they came to practice, but also just knowing that it's okay to experience something that brings up emotion, feeling, sensation. It's actually our aversity to having those experiences that creates the hysteric experience. It's what creates that influence. And so this is a gentle way to actually allow ourselves to experience that. So Yoga Nidra is always an invitation. Most guides that I resonate with and what I like to share is always inviting people to experience something. Because as soon as you start creating verbiage around force or having to do something, then it removes this beautiful essence of the practice, which is your own experience. Ruth, you and I, we're guiding people to experience themselves. And so it's not us asking you to do something. It's us opening up the possibility for you to experience an aspect or a layer or a level of consciousness within yourself. And some people will not be ready for that. And that's okay. So that's what I would have to share on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love how you're bringing in the compassion aspect and also the offering, the inviting and the non-forcing. I know if somebody is telling me what to do in a meditation, my automatic response is like, don't tell me what to do. It's like automatic resistance rises. So that's what I love about Yoga Nidra so much is that we're offering images, we're offering breathing techniques, we're offering to focus on different body parts. Everything that we're offering, it's all optional. And you can choose to go along. You can choose to let your mind drift and know that our voice, your guide's voice is always there that you can choose to come back to. You can choose to stay awake. You can choose to go to sleep. It's a very empowering way to trust that the client or the practitioner, they have all of the healing and all of the wisdom that is already built into their system within them. And the only thing that we're really doing is just creating that safe container and compassionate conditions for them to, like you said earlier, to just be themselves without an agenda, without performance, without pressure, without any of the roles that they might have taken on in their social life. So I have so many things to ask you, but we also need to be mindful of the time.
Yeah.
That middle path, Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your offerings and your program and where people can find you, how they can connect with you?
Yeah. If you find Yoga Nidra fascinating, if it's a practice that resonates with you and you want to uncover more of it, go deeper, or even if you want to share it, guide it, or write scripts to do your own self-healing and record them for yourself, I have just began the beta program for the Peace and Rest program, and it'll be finalized and ready within the year or the new year. So for the next upcoming circle, there is a possibility to join. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to my website, aylanova.com, and there's an option to enroll for the program there. And then if you want to just learn more about Yoga Nidra, through experience, I have the podcast as well as the YouTube channel. So you can either listen on the YouTube channel or you can listen on the podcast, which I'm sure you'll add links to for everyone.
Yeah, I'll put everything in the show notes so you guys can find Ayla Nova and all of her links and all of her offerings. And I really like her podcast. It is just a beautiful journeys. There's so many episodes on there, and there's meditations for pretty much everything that you can think of. Stuff for, just better sleep, for rest and restoration, for anxiety, for depression, for addiction, for self-compassion. I love like the healing sleep series. There's the series for going through all the chakras. It's really comprehensive and each one is just very, very well done. So I highly, highly recommend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ayla Nova, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was truly such a delight chatting with you. And I feel like every time we speak, I always learn something new from you and just walk away feeling really rejuvenated and inspired. So thank you. And I hope that our audience also resonated with what you've shared in this conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Yes, it's been a pleasure connecting with you in this way as well. And I guess the final sign off I'd like to share with everyone is just, you are loved just as you are. And I say thank you for being here, not just because I'm grateful for that in the sense of you're listening, but the fact that you are here, that you are on this earth and that we get makes me emotional that we get to walk this life together. So
yeah,
listening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Ayla. If you enjoyed this content, I welcome you to subscribe, like, share, or leave a comment. I truly appreciate your support. Sending you my best wishes. Until next time.